If you're ready to make changes in your life, then stay a while and let deep conversation unlock the place you're most ready to transform. Welcome to Breathtakingly Imperfect, a podcast dedicated to exploring the human experience and sharing of heart-earned wisdom, all to help you live with love, presence, and freedom. I offer insights from my own journey of healing, finding peace, and personal growth in hopes of inspiring you to find meaning, fulfillment, and a true love for life. I'm your host, Yesenia. Let's walk this breathtakingly and imperfectly beautiful journey I call life. I believe words, especially the way we receive them now in podcasts, are an art. It's what I chose to use and connect the subjects I feel can help us find and develop our ability to live with an unshakable sense of peace. Here, you'll find words that aim to connect deeply and are filled with freedom. I don't seek to be right or wrong, but rather give my passions and perspectives openly and genuinely to those who are ready to find themselves. Over the last few years, I've learned that our minds tend to hold more onto the unpleasant than what's pleasant. There are reasons for that, survival and whatnot, but honestly, I find it hilariously cruel. Personally, I'd like to remember more of what floats my boat and less of what sinks it. But hey, I get it. I mean, I don't, but I do. I think in general, had it not been for this awareness journey that I'm on, I would have continued to focus only on my problems and nothing else. I mean, I had bits of things that I held near and dear to my heart, but more often than not, the appreciation for them was brief and quiet. And what I'm not saying is that I'm trying to forget what hurts. I'm just learning not to let it be the only thing I remember. If you've been part of this 10 episode journey of ours, then you know I frequented topics such as presence over automaticity, attention over inattention, and love for the small things over just the big ones. Just naming a few. What they all have in common is that within each circumstance, gratitude becomes noticeable. In the not so distant past, my life was only compiled of constantly wanting, complaining, and just feeling unsatisfied. I'm not saying these things aren't right or wrong because one is entitled to feel however they want to. But for me, it just meant that only wanting, complaining, and being unsatisfied was what I made my life about. And it was about much more than that, though. As real as my obstacles had been, they weren't my entire life. The battles we face are very real, and I like to think that for the most part, they're very valid. At least for me, 6 years ago, it felt that way. I felt stuck and lost among many other things. It was what I gave my attention to the most. What did change was how much of my attention those things were allowed to take up. Somewhere along my journey, my mind was being asked to take in, to pay attention to the things outside of what I saw as my problems. I felt like this was the equivalent of being inside of a tornado and being asked to look at the parts that were being destroyed. But that also made me realize all I was doing was focusing on the tornado. This tornado was powerful enough that looking anywhere else felt almost impossible. In that same way, I felt resistance to take notice for the things that were still in place. 6 years ago, I felt I had very little, if nothing at all, to be grateful for because of the things going on and what wasn't going on in my life. And I made the choice to take notice of what I was grateful for, regardless of my pitfalls. And slowly but surely, feeling like there wasn't a ton to be grateful for began to transform. I was grateful for my kids, for their life, and for their health. I was grateful for my husband, his patience, his love, and his kindness. I was grateful for his drive and resilience, which allowed me to genuinely appreciate being a stay at home parent. I was grateful that my time at home allowed me to be present for the hurdles that our kids faced with ADHD. I was grateful I was able to make our house a home. And honestly, the list can go on and on. Once I made the choice to look at my life, like truly look at it, the things I already had began unfolding the more I kept looking. When I made the choice to start noticing what I did have to be grateful for, I felt lifted from the hole that felt like was my life. How could I stay in a hole when I now saw what grew all around me? Noticing gratitude to me is seeing, I mean, like really seeing what life has given us and what we've probably overlooked 1,000 times over. When you notice even just one thing that you're grateful for, a connection is formed back to the things that make your life already so rich. It's a reminder of the things you have, the things that we love, and the way that they exist in your life. In a way, noticing where my gratitude was helped me start rebuilding what once was damaged by giving life back to what I already had standing. And look, it took me a while to realize that there are things we just can't control. Circumstances change all the time. And even what we think of as our foundation sometimes needs rebuilding too. What I could control was where my attention went. That was a choice, a shift in focus of the inventory of things in our lives is exactly what creates the tools we need to build. Taking inventory of what's still standing with a newfound focus on where it is that we could start rebuilding. I'd survived it, metaphorically, of course. But the truth was that it felt like I'd just barely made it out. And that didn't necessarily mean that I was okay. My reality was that my life had gotten knocked around a bit. What I had left was precious and bittersweet because it existed among the rubble. And this is what I mean. I'm glad I heard the sirens, survived the storm, but my reality didn't mean I'd instantly found happiness. I was grateful for what I had found, but that would not take away from the fact that I'd taken a metaphorical hit. I was still hurt, and even gratitude wouldn't erase what happened. 6 years ago, I'd begun finding bits and pieces of a newfound appreciation for my life. And it was a great starting point for me. But that also did not mean that I was where I intended to be in life. At that point, I was 2 years in to my 1 year supposed return into the workforce. And while I was like very grateful to be home, I also wanted something else for myself. I didn't know what that was, and I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And while having gratitude for some precious things in my life was all great and dandy, I was still unhappy. I still felt that under all of that gratitude, something was off with my life. And even though I couldn't pinpoint what it was, I did know it wasn't what I wanted out of life. It was like the pieces of my life I was grateful for were not enough for the structure that I needed to rebuild or wanted to rebuild. It was like someone handing you only part of the supplies that you need to build a whole house. How can you say thanks for what you have without pretending you don't need something more? I remember the day before I gave birth to my daughter. She was a scheduled baby, so I had time to process the inevitable of our fourth family member. I dropped off my son at my mom's before heading back home. And before I left, I held my son and, and I cried profoundly because I truthfully did not feel ready to let go of my baby as an only child and the fact that my life was about to change yet again. When my mom asked if my tears were happy ones, I replied that they weren't. She said that I shouldn't be crying and that I should be grateful for what was about to transpire into my life. But being inclined to be grateful just felt insincere in that moment. I mean, you can fast forward now, and I recognize that it was just fear. And while she made a point to point me towards gratitude, I think that we tend to forget that in that feelings are included. We could be grateful and afraid. But here's what gratitude did for me in both situations. The gratitude I was able to find 6 years ago, as small as it may have been, was still a stepping stone of sorts because my attention shifted towards the things in my life that were the most important. It didn't mean that acknowledging the gratitude meant pretending everything else was peachy. If anything, it was my gratitude that brought to light the issues I had put to the side for so long. It didn't just focus on the good, it helped me distinguish what I valued from what was no longer working. It provided a separation of sorts to the things that brought me happiness and those that I was unhappy about. When it came to the day on the eve of my daughter's birth, I was both grateful and grieving the changes that would take place in the following 24 hours. And gratitude just didn't have to be masked by feelings of joy. What I've been able to recognize as gratitude connects deeply with the morals and values most important to us, genuinely. For example, I was grateful to be able to stay home with our kids, but as someone that sought a career, I also wanted that too. Gratitude for a part of my life didn't mean I was fulfilled. And look, since we're being honest here, there were times I didn't get it. If my husband was having difficulties with work, I thought as a way to be supportive, I tell him he should just be grateful for where he was because 15 years ago, his job was harder. And while that could have been possibly true, he could have remembered that he was grateful and where he was now, but that didn't make his obstacles at work a fairy tale either. He could be grateful for his job and want a different outcome too. I'd been confusing gratitude with my standpoint and not his, whereas his gratitude and standpoint could also both be true. It was being able to acknowledge the things in my life I appreciated most without being forced and most true to me that finally allowed me to be the most honest with myself about the things I wanted out of life. I've been able to learn to appreciate what I have without taking away from what I don't. Being grateful and being ungrateful are opposites, but having gratitude and dissatisfaction are not. If gratitude was as simple as noticing, then what goes unnoticed? Finding gratitude in the things we could be taking for granted can also serve as a reminder of the way they're actually deeply meaningful in our life. I was pregnant for most of my senior year of high school, and as if it weren't already a traumatizing experience. One of my teachers I liked the most told me my life would always consist of trying to afford diapers. Like that was it. The future that many people painted for me felt like an inescapable jail sentence. And me being me pivoted relentlessly towards the opposite direction of the reality they were so sure I'd be a part of. And what that caused for me was to know more of what I didn't want than what I actually did. What I set out to do had no seemingly end in sight because it was defined by avoidance rather than desire. I just knew I didn't want to be another teenage parent statistic and that I wanted success not just for me, but for my family too, for all of us. And that I found focus for the part of me that wanted to ensure success, never truly ever defining what that meant. And if I'm being completely honest here, it was an unnecessary hold to have kept for so long. This teacher had probably also long forgotten about me and what he'd said, and I was there trying to prove what to who and over how many years. Why? The truth was, I never defined what that success was for me. But once I did, I was able to stop carrying a scoreboard for a game that no one else had been playing but me. The greatest part was that I did accomplish what I'd set out not to do. But had I not developed self awareness for the things in my life, then that accomplishment would have never felt like an accomplishment. It would have been like swimming towards land, swimming past many, and never truly making it to a place where I could stop and take in the distance I traveled. But I'm happy to say that when I did finally make it to land, a few things happened for me. For one, I was actually in awe of myself for the very first time. I realized many of us don't give ourselves our own flowers because we're either too busy planting new ones or giving them away. But being able to appreciate even some of the things in my life helped me to keep going without doing so desperately. The other thing that happened for me was that I was able to recognize that for some reason, I had one foot in and one foot out of the water by still hanging on to a goal I'd set out of fear and limiting intentions. I wanted both feet on the ground, and I was keeping one foot for someone else was just not going to work for me. Who I was on this land I finally made it to was not who I was when I set out swimming. This version of me could keep going, would keep going, but this time from a genuine place that was more of what I wanted and less of what I thought I needed to prove to others. I love to tell you that I find gratitude every single day, but I'm only human and I tend to forget. But when I do remember to notice, I know what happens. From personal experience, when you stop and take a look around the things you do have, you'll have the opportunity to realize things like who you've become, what you've survived and what you've built. A few years ago, we built our current home. It was a dream for us that we'd made into a reality. And the entire process truly felt surreal, and it was more than I could have imagined. This house was larger than our first one, and it was literally brand new. Well, at some point during the school year, my daughter went to visit one of her friends in our new neighborhood. She came back saying things like, Her house was so big. Oh my god, mom, you should have seen her room was so huge. You name it, and it just topped anything that we had now. And she was like, "I wish my room was that big. I wish my closet was that big." And I became a bit annoyed with her comments because initially I thought, why isn't she appreciative of what she has? Even though what I ended up saying was, wow, her house sounds so cool and whatnot. I didn't want to take away from what she'd shared with me. So I thought to myself, I'd tell her and talk to her about being grateful for the things, we do have while celebrating others at a later time. And while I worked out what to tell her, I started to realize something. When I was about my daughter's age, I used to tag along with one of my friends to visit their relative in the suburbs. I used to think, wow, I want something like this to be my life. They had a house, a family, a mom, and a dad. And the little girl who we'd visit, she just seemed so carefree. Not at all the way her cousin and I wore worry on ourselves. I thought to myself, well, damn. I thought to myself, well, damn. Because I realized I had what I wanted once so long ago to live. My normal was unnoticed as the very thing I once hoped to have. In that moment, I promise you, I felt engulfed with appreciation for my life. And even though I'd let it gone unnoticed for so long, I found it once again, the meaningfulness that it meant to me, especially for that part of me that was 12 and set out a wish to have what I have today. Even more than that, I realized that my daughter's ordinary was once my dream. I have to admit something. When I first started this journey, I honestly didn't know how to use gratitude. I even tried incorporating it as a part of my meditation, kind of like a list that I run through in my mind. Not only did that feel inauthentic, it felt forced and just like surface based. I was treating gratitude as a practice before I knew gratitude as a genuine response for the things in my life. When I practice gratitude daily, I'd say I was grateful for things like my kids, my husband, the food that we have at home. But I also found myself reciting those very same four things like every single day. And at times I used to think like, just, okay, what else am I grateful for? Just think really hard. And I couldn't find any other form of gratitude in my daily life. Those things were important to me, but the way I'd run through them missed something deeper. And gratitude as a genuine response wasn't a thing that came daily for me either. Gratitude came spontaneously when I took a pause to fully take in the deepest parts of me that I valued the most. Gratitude became the acceptance, love, and humility with which I held my experiences. And I mean that. I told you earlier about our new house. And frankly, I can't talk about this new one without mentioning our first home. It was small, old, and a pain to maintain at times. We lived there for 8 years. And during that time, the goal had always been to graduate to something larger for our kids. But the time I did spend at our first home wasn't constantly spent wishing I had the home I longed for. Don't get me wrong. I sometimes drive past nice houses and think to myself, like, one day. But the moment I got home, I was home. It was my home. but I could also want another house without withholding appreciation from the one I already had. And from the very first day and every day going forward, I accepted it as such. I didn't have the newest or largest home, but I take care of what I had and poured love into every space, inside and out, until the day we finally sold it. And I'm not lying to you when I tell you that I often took my little house in from the sidewalk, sometimes during the day, sometimes at night, because I felt so much gratitude for what was mine. And that's just one example, because maybe what was for me a house is true for someone else of something more than just a house. When I dealt with my unexpected and unsuccessful attempt at reaching out to my estranged dad, gratitude helped me accept what I could not change and release my expectation that he would be different. I found gratitude, but for myself and the ways I felt I did what I had to do by reaching out to him in the first place. This was in an effort to find healing and closure for me at the end of the day. I found gratitude for what I had learned from the situation he had put us in by honoring the fact that he hadn't changed. Nothing would, that the whole situation sucked, but that I'd reached peace with what happened because that was just what he was as a father in my story. And that part couldn't be rewritten. With love for myself and what I'd been through, I was able to let go and move on with my life. That's the beauty in gratitude. Full blown, head on, but most importantly of all, this is where I am now. It's acknowledgement to the fullest regard of our truth. And there's no one you have to be the most honest with than yourself. Maybe that's what gratitude has taught me more than anything: acceptance. Today, we talked gratitude. At first, it was something I thought you should feel happy about. But what I came to understand was that gratitude doesn't mean pretending everything's okay and that we're happy. Gratitude, I learned, was what I began to pause long enough to notice was already a part of my life. We talked about the different parts of life that can be both gratitude and still want more. Gratitude taught me that accepting where I am and where I want to go is possible. We talked about becoming less forceful with gratitude and more attentive. This paved the way for me to see things I'd once hoped for and unintentionally overlooked. It helped me see how far I'd come and brought honesty and clarity about where it was I actually wanted to go in life. As I close out these first 10 episodes focused on awareness, I'm reflecting on what happens when we simply slow down long enough to see our lives for what they really are. I'm talking good, difficult, the things we've outgrown, what we've built, and the things we even forget just to appreciate. Because sometimes just taking in what you already have can be the beginning of change. I believe that when someone doesn't know where to start, there's no such thing as anything being too basic. I knew that what I wanted was to start at the beginning and to share the things that helped me become aware of myself. When I was starting out, I was inspired by people like Oprah for opening up perspectives like Eckhart Tolle's and Jay Shetty with his approachability and words. And as I've progressed, it's been authors and speakers. that have energized my soul to connect with the world. As I found growth, I realized there's a distance between the person just beginning their journey from the ones who are further along. People like Oprah and Jay Shetty have without a doubt made an impact in the lives of many. But at some point, I feel the distance between those starting out and those with years on their journey was a lengthy one. I want to shorten that distance by sharing what helped me with hopes of helping someone else. If you've been tuning in, these first 10 episodes were meant to invite awareness into the many, many different parts of our lives. Together, we'll move through awareness, the innermost parts of us, and through the parts of our life that call for action. Feel free to begin wherever you are. Gratitude being just one of those things that we could be more aware of. And one of the things that taught me the most to see my life differently. When I began truly understanding gratitude, I realized with it comes appreciation for where you are in life with complete honesty about where you want to go next. I like to view life as our very own gardens, meant to be nurtured, cleared, and just allowed to bloom. So, as you go on to explore your life's personal oasis, as always, may you leave here only with what can help yours grow. I am so grateful to have shared the space with you. And if this episode planted something within you, you can water it with me on Instagram, where this community continues to bloom. The link for that is in the show notes. Until next time, keep honoring your growth, trusting your path, and embracing this breathtakingly and perfectly beautiful journey that is life.